So again, welcome everybody. My name is Kevin Roth. I'm the program chair for the Wyncote Audubon Society. And tonight we have a fantastic program. Our presenter tonight is Kathy Dale. Kathy Dale is Audubon's Director of Science, Technology, and Community Science Team Lead. This team helps deliver Audubon's Christmas bird count, climate watch, and the Great Backyard Bird Count programs to volunteers each year. Many are actually on this call tonight. I see them here. So joining Audubon in 2001, Kathy also helps implement the technology components of these and other programs, which are a big part of these programs. She became a community scientist when she participated in her first Christmas bird count soon after college. So she has a lot of experience in this. We're looking forward to this. So now I present Kathy Dale on Climate Watch, monitoring birds in a changing climate.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Lee. I'm really glad that you all are joining us tonight. Glad to see so many interested attendees. As Kevin said, I work on the science team of National Audubon Society. And I've been with Audubon, 21 years this year. But decades ago, I became a bird monitoring volunteer by joining this thing called the Christmas bird count. And that's where I actually learned to bird. I learned how to identify birds while on a Christmas bird count. And as you can imagine, I was hooked at that point and have been birding and doing all sorts of bird projects ever since. So I really started out in this part of my career as a volunteer. But then went into information technology, which has to do with the world of computers and programming and developing software. And so I did a little of that. But here I am back at Audubon, where I can marry my interest in birds with some of my technology interests. So I'm really happy to be able to work on a program that also involves a lot of other people who love birds as well. So that makes it fun. I'm going to share my screen here. Is it sharing correctly? Okay.
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to be talking about Audubon's Climate Watch program tonight. So this is we consider this a true collaboration between volunteers who know the habitats and the birds in their local areas, and our scientists who want to understand the variability of what's happening with birds as they respond to climate change. So in 2019, we released a report known as Survival by Degrees. And in this report, we analyzed data for over 600 species of birds in North America. And the analysis essentially showed us that 2/3 of those species were at risk of extinction due to climate change. Now, we published 2 peer-reviewed papers out of this work, and these are linked to on our Survival by Degrees website. So if you're interested in reading the details of this analysis, please feel free to take a look there. I'm going to talk a little bit about the analysis and linking this to the work on the ground. So the analysis consisted of combining over 140 million bird observations from 70 data sources. So these are data sources that come from volunteers like yourselves. Things like eBird, bird banding data, various other observational data sets that are available for researchers to use. And so we combined those data sets to start building models or predictions of where birds are now and where birds may be in the future. So in addition to the bird observation data, of course, we built our models by combining that with climate variables such as precipitation and temperature change, human land use patterns, both urban, agricultural, all sorts of ways in which humans are impacting land, vegetation changes. And we also included in this model group specific variables. By that, I mean variables that are unique to grassland birds and forest birds, and other groupings of birds, water birds, marsh birds. There are specific variables to the ecology of those groups of birds that are part of the predictive models. So the modeling process and the data was based on the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change 5th Assessment Report. So this is data and a report that are widely accepted by scientists. And we also did work on 3 different scenarios. We modeled how the birds might respond in a 1.5 degrees Celsius scenario, and that's based on a level of emissions that might be in the atmosphere, a 2.0 Celsius increase, and a 3.0 degrees Celsius increase of global warming. So what the models do is they, for example, on the wood thrush, we took some care to consider the particular species and its ecology. So we look at the most fundamental climate needs for this species and the group that the species is in. What climate variables do they need for that to survive? So whatever climate variables are associated with that bird and its future range then are projected out into the future, we can start to see where the predictions of the climate itself will be changing and moving. The challenge for the bird, of course, is we don't know if the habitat that the bird requires will be moving along at the same pace or in the same location, obviously, because of human land use. So some of the group specific variables I mentioned include things like global surface water for water birds, wetland types of wetlands for marsh birds, distance to coastline. And in addition to this, once we developed our models, we had 2 experts review every single map, so that we also essentially did a review to make sure the maps were really reflecting the current knowledge of what we know about the birds. And again, so we're doing predictions for where the climate suitability space for that species is in the future based on different warming scenarios. So you can see from this example of the wood thrush, the maps look very different. These are summer maps, and they look quite a bit different based on the warming scenario. The lower warming scenario, 1.5, which is basically where we are now on our current trajectory, at least. You see the red area indicates range loss, or areas that are going to be less suitable for the wood thrush. And then the green and the blue on the upper end of that range shows where it's going to be improving in the northern tier of the current range. And of course, under 3 degrees scenario here, you've got a really severe range loss. Looks like more than 50% of their current range will be less suitable, will have less climate suitability for that species. So this presents a real challenge for this species and many others. So the basic takeaway from this research is that science shows that 2/3 of North American bird species are at risk of extinction from these climate change scenarios. But the one good thing that we can learn from this is that the science shows if we take action now, we can help improve the chances for 2/3 of the species that are at risk. So it's a lot of change that we've predicted. And again, these are predictions. These are models of how we think things are going to go in the future for specific species. And the question is, are the birds going to follow what our predictions say? How closely will they follow these predictions? How quickly might they follow these predictions? And will their future ranges match our predictions? This is where community scientists, citizen scientists, which Audubon calls community scientists, are a very important part of this information loop. We essentially need those who are familiar with the birds in their areas to ground truth this science. So Climate Watch aims to document the species responses to climate change by having volunteers in the field look for birds where our climate models project they should or should not be in the current decade. So we're studying the current decade, the current 10-year span of the 2020s. So informing the bird models by having volunteers go out and collect data will improve the model predictions and monitor change across the landscape. This really is, climate change is a landscape scale problem. So we need to have volunteers all across the landscape collecting data in order for us to really learn about what kind of changes are happening for the birds, as well as how they may be responding. So Audubon obviously has been doing community science programs since 1900, quite a breadth of volunteers involved in our organization, and many of you are those volunteers. So it's a new opportunity, something new and different. We started in 2016 with Climate Watch to try to collect these hypothesis-driven tests to validate the models or to learn more about how we need to improve the models. So Climate Watch is essentially a science-driven survey with a very structured protocol, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's monitoring with a purpose and hypothesis-driven. So we have these predictions and we need to understand exactly what's going on in local areas. We've updated the models at least once from version 1 to version 2. And so we have improved and refined the models to a more refined degree, a 1 kilometer refinement of the predictive part of the models, so that we can get sort of a finer grain prediction available to us as we start to learn about these species that we're going to be studying. And so where we have to start on Climate Watch is coming up with a group of species to monitor, to go out and collect data for, so that we can test these models. And what we did is look through the 384 some species that may be at risk through our predictions. And we came up with a selection of species that have good models with strong predictions of either change up or down. They have wide geographic coverage so that we can span the landscape and collect data in a number of areas. And they have presence in summer and winter so that we can check both the winter and the summer predictions. And of course, it's important that these species be easily identifiable, or people can learn to identify them, so that we can get as many people as possible out there looking for these species and doing the climate watch work. So the 12 species we're currently studying are the 3 species of bluebirds. Those span the continent, of course. 4 species of nuthatch. We've got American goldfinch, lesser goldfinch, painted bunting, eastern towhee, and spotted towhee. So these are the 12 species that are part of the study. Now, volunteers pick 1 or more species to actually target when they go out and do the monitoring, and I'll explain how we do that. But in addition to having a limited set of species that we can study, obviously, we need to understand, how do we go from these nice predictive models that show on a map? And by the way, you can go onto our Survival by Degrees website, and all 600 some species that we studied have interactive animated models that you can take a look at. You can select the emission scenario and the season, and you can take a look what the predictions are yourself. You can zoom in and out. But in terms of getting this information to into a useful format for volunteers, we stepped it down by essentially assigning a 10 by 10 kilometer grid across all of North America. Each square has a value that indicates whether the climate suitability for each of the species is predicted to improve or worsen or remain stable. So you see here, I've kind of highlighted the area west of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. And when you zoom in to see these 10-kilometer squares, you see different colors, and each of those colors means something different. So in this particular visualization, the blue means that there's a prediction for worsening climate suitability for eastern bluebird. And the gray means stasis or no change predicted. And then the yellow means improving climate suitability for eastern bluebird. So once you get down to that level, you can look at the maps and see what the predictions are in your area, in your yard, your town. Gives you a little bit more guidance on what might be happening locally and help us learn what's happening in your area. So Climate Watch happens twice a year. We've got a winter survey period, which is a 30-day period, January 15th to February 15th. So it just means volunteers can pick any single day within that 30-day period to do surveys. And then we also have a breeding season. We mostly refer to it as our summer Climate Watch season. And that's another 30-day period from May 15th to June 15th. And we have a 30-day period so that it's for a couple of reasons. One is it needs to equate to other standard bird monitoring schemes that cover winter, which is non-migration, non-breeding period, and then breeding season. Like breeding bird survey. So they have to kind of coincide with other existing programs, but volunteers can pick any day within that 30-day period to do the work. So what does the Climate Watch participant do? Well, they identify the target species for which they are doing surveys, or Climate Watch program can also be used to pair experienced and inexperienced birders together and have people learn how to identify these species if they don't know already by going out with somebody who's familiar with the species. So desire to learn is important. They need to be available to conduct point count for at least one day during the count period. And I'll talk more about what you actually do on count day. Participants should communicate with their chapter or group leader. We have lots of coordinators across the country who are working with their group of volunteers. WinCode Audubon is one of them. We have other Audubon chapters. We have bird clubs. We have master naturalist groups that run group surveys all over. So there's a local coordinator that you need to communicate with. Participants should submit their own data. And again, I'm stressing that this is something that new birders can learn how to do. So it's an opportunity to engage maybe people just out of college who studied biology and want to understand field survey methods. That's an opportunity there. So the other role that volunteers play here are, as I mentioned, local coordinators for their efforts. A local coordinator is similar to what we refer to as a compiler. If you're familiar with the Christmas bird count, we have compilers who organize the local Christmas bird count circle effort. And a Climate Watch coordinator is similar to that. They're responsible for recruiting their local participants to get involved in Climate Watch and to pass on the science information, the basis for the hypothesis of the program, some of the information that I've talked about already. And I'm going to talk about some results as well. So that's helpful information for volunteers so that they understand the context within which they are doing this work. We have two types of coordinators. One is a regional coordinator who could work at a state or other regional level to recruit local coordinators. And then of course the local coordinator that would be at a town or area around a major city like Philadelphia. So the coordinators also coordinate the efforts, making sure people understand when they can go out in the field, what they need to do, and to submit their data. And we maintain contact with coordinators, regional coordinators and local coordinators both. So they are the main point of contact to the Climate Watch team at Audubon. So again, I've mentioned Climate Watch is something that could be taught to new birders. There's a limited set of species that they need to learn about. And in particular, most Climate Watch efforts are starting with 1 or 2 species. So they can really focus on learning how to identify an eastern bluebird or western bluebird or goldfinch, and focus on understanding that first. So a lot of our groups will pair experienced and inexperienced birders together. I've also been on groups where one person is doing the birding, the other person is doing the note taking or the recording of the data. So that's another way in which people can help if they're new to the process. We also have some volunteers who prefer not to interact with technology. So sometimes they don't have a mobile phone, they don't want to use a mobile phone. We actually have a number of Amish volunteers here in Pennsylvania who like to collect data on birds, but obviously they do not have access to computers. And so they work with other people who will take their data and enter the data for them. So there's an opportunity to pair people up to sort of share the load that way. For new birders, again, coordinators can help new birders select the survey points, the locations where they need to go and do their surveys. And Climate Watch, again, since there's a limited number of species, it's a perfect opportunity for new birders to study, a few species at a time and get really good at identifying these birds. So there's a training opportunity there. So let me talk a little bit about the protocol. There are 5 steps involved in the protocol, and I'll go through each of them in a little bit more detail, but we have some really easy printable resources. Here's a 1-page self-print resource we have on our website that details the structured protocol. Some people may feel a little bit overwhelmed because it's called a structured protocol, but when you break it down into these steps, it's a little easier to understand. So this is a piece you can use if you're talking about the program to new participants. So the first step is to select your target species. We suggest as a start, if you're starting out, to start with one species, aspire to cover 10 squares, 10 contiguous squares for one species before you take on another species. So that's a place to start. There are some places in the country that will have many of these species in the same habitat. So in New Mexico, for example, our chapters in New Mexico monitor all 3 species of all 3 species of bluebird, because all 3 species actually do occur in New Mexico. It's pretty interesting. And there are in the East Coast, Northeast, there are places obviously where you could possibly see a bluebird, white-breasted nuthatch, goldfinch in a similar, maybe not a similar habitat, but a habitat that's in close proximity. So there's a little bit of a caveat in that even if we suggest you start with one species, it's possible to target more than one species at a time on a survey. So in determining which species to work with, obviously, if you're with a chapter or a bird group that has a particular interest in one or more of these species that are on this list of 12 species, you can start by looking and seeing what the predictions are for that species. We have an online tool where you can zoom into these 10-kilometer squares and see what the predictions are in your area. So that may help you decide which species to indicate as your target. And we recommend that you start with a species and squares that have the most predicted change for your area. Another method is also go to the same planning tool, and you can look and see where others have been doing their work, what species they are working on, what areas they are covering. And you can, select the same species or different species depending on what area you want to cover. So the next step 2, is then to decide, once you have your target species selected, to decide which square you're going to cover. So again, I've mentioned these online tools we have, which are open to everyone. There's no login required. And so you go on to our planner and zoom in, pick whatever species you want to try to study, zoom into your area and see what the predictions are in either winter or summer. That gives you some idea of what the predictions are near you. Once you decide which square you want to survey, we have a Claim a Climate Watch Square tool also, which is where you essentially tag a square with your name so that we can see who's who's working on what and where they're working. So on this right-hand picture here, you see some squares that are colored in green. That indicates those are claimed by some volunteers doing work on one or more species within that area. So you can go and see what's not been covered yet using the Claim a Square tool. So once you've selected your square, you have your target species, the next step is to figure out where you're going to do your surveys. The protocol calls for 12 point counts. I call them point counts. They're the same thing as stationary counts. So you stand in one location for 5 minutes, and you need to find 12 locations to do that within the square. Obviously, you need to be able to access. They need to be public access, or you have permission to access those areas. So these 12 locations you see on this example here, all the blue dots are the actual survey locations within these squares. I think this is Iowa. And the guidance is that each of the surveys should be within the best available habitat for your target species. That's the main thing. Where's the available habitat for that species? And the survey location has to be at least 200 meters away from each of the other survey points. And our tools give you ways to measure that. When you conduct your survey, we're going to ask you to record either the target birds or all birds that you detect within 100 meters of your survey location. And this is to help avoid double counting. So you can, if you look in these squares, you notice that, the points are following the kind of where there's some really appealing habitat for the birds along a river. You also notice that some of them are grouped. They're not evenly spaced throughout the square, and that's perfectly fine. Habitat is the thing that drives where the selection is. And so obviously, as part of this, the expertise of local volunteers is important, understanding what are the habitat requirements currently of these 12 species, or at the very least your target species, what are the habitat requirements of that species? So understanding the appropriate habitat in winter and in summer is an important part of this. Local knowledge is key. Understanding where's the best habitat based on you birding just in general. You may know where those areas are. There are other tools like the eBird species maps where people are reporting species. You can see where things have been reported in certain seasons, of course. Going out and scouting sites could be an important part of this as well. Sometimes you don't always know until you drive a particular route how long it's going to take you to access an area, or what it may look like in a particular season if you're scouting it in one season and you're 5 minutes away from the second season. It may be a little bit different. So, and obviously the Audubon online field guides are free, available, both the mobile app and the online guides. The online guide gives you some information about the habitat requirements. And I've mentioned this thing about multiple target species. Again, if in your area you are able to see, there is the habitat available and you're able to generally see more than one species commonly, then you can actually have more than one target species. There are some groups that have 3 or 4 or 5 target species. By that I mean you just go out once and you can monitor for all of the target species. The species have different habitats. However, you would need to do 12 point counts for each of the species separately. So there's a key difference there. Again, planning your survey locations. They do not have to be randomly or evenly spaced out at all. Habitat is the guidance. What's feasible for you to complete in one day? Going around a 10-kilometer square can actually be quite challenging depending on the terrain that you are covering. What's the best habitat and where is it available? Must be 200 meters apart, each of the survey sites I've mentioned. We have an online tool. The same online tool where you look at the predictions is where you can drop a point You can actually click and put a point on the map. And then there's a tool that allows you to draw a 100 meter, a 200 meter buffer around that. So you can make sure your surveys are all the appropriate distance. Before we had this tool, we recommended either pacing out when you were scouting to pace the distance between your locations, or to use an odometer. That's obviously still an option. So step 4 is to actually go out and conduct your stationary counts. The guidance is to conduct 12 of the 5-minute point counts within your square on one day before noon. You can either use something like eBird Mobile, or eBird Desktop. And using eBird, obviously, one of the best options is to report all birds that you see in here during that 5 minutes. There's another option in our Audubon mobile app that has a Climate Watch data form that you can use. And this data form only requires that you record the presence of the target species. So a little bit less data to collect. So that's available in the Audubon mobile app. In addition, we request that people indicate the presence of a nest box or a feeder station. By the way, you're going to record the presence and the numbers of birds. Each of the point counts should have a separate checklist recorded for that location. And again, I mentioned we like to have all work done before noon, but obviously in the winter that may not be possible. So afternoon surveys are permitted if the weather is suboptimal in the morning. And we've heard from volunteers that it takes on average between 2 to 6 hours to conduct one square with 12 survey points. Obviously, this varies depending on the terrain, what part of the country you're in. I'm based in southern Chester County, which is kind of about an hour and a half west of Philadelphia. And it takes me just around 3 hours, sometimes a little more than 3 hours, to conduct one of my squares. So it really just depends on how much walking in or driving you need to do, and the access. So here I just decided to pull up half of one of my squares here. This is southern Chester County, and I've indicated 6 of my survey locations in orange here, so you can get a sense of kind of how they're spaced and where they are. In this area, which is a sort of a land trust area, I have access to certain, I'm kind of restricted to their property. So the other half of the circle, all my circles, all of my surveys are kind of grouped very closely. But in this area, I do have to walk into a couple of these points. There's a road there that we're not permitted to drive on. So I do have to walk into some of my points. So you get a sense of some options to you. Obviously, this is going to vary depending on where you are. Again, I'll just go over the very quick ways of collecting your data. You can obviously collect your data on paper if that's what you want to do out in the field. I do that sometimes, particularly in winter when my fingers don't work. But in terms of submitting the data to Audubon, you can then submit your data to eBird, and then we have a portal through which you can submit your eBird checklist to us. And we have instructions on how to do this. So I don't think I want to go over this here, but we do have a lot of material, including PowerPoints and webinars on how to actually submit your data. So that's one option if you're already an eBird user or that's something that appeals to you. The Audubon mobile app, again, has a Climate Watch form. And if you use the Audubon mobile app, once you save the data in your form, then we have the data automatically. So that's an option for you as well. 2 online options. The resources that we provide, and I can give you the links to this when we get to the Q&A section of the presentation tonight. I'd really encourage you to take a look at the predictions that are in the Survival by Degrees report. All of the predictions for the 600 species that we studied are available online. Again, you can select a species, zoom in, see the predictions based on different emission scenarios, different seasons, and see what the predictions are. So it's a helpful resource. In terms of Climate Watch resources, obviously we have a website, and this printable one-page self-print documents available on the website too, if it's something you want to take a look at. This is kind of a good beginning step to taking a look and seeing what the protocol is. It's got the basic contact information, the website. We've got an online FAQ, frequently asked questions. These are the questions that we received in the first few years of the program. So we know these are questions that are typically on volunteers' minds about how to participate in the program. We have a very thorough protocol manual. I often refer to this as our 28-page protocol manual, but don't let that scare you, because part of the reason why it's lengthy is that we really did try to detail all of the things that came up in the first few years of the program where people had questions, and we realized we needed to talk a little bit more about some of the caveats of the program, like what if you have more than one target species. We also have a lot of coordinator tips in the survey manual as well. So specific sort of call outs, tips to people who are leading their local efforts. We have a summary. I'm going to talk about this in a minute. We have a summary about some of the findings of the program, which is very exciting, in addition to links to the peer-reviewed research. And then we have a lot of recorded webinars. In particular, our Climate Watch for Beginners is a really important place to start, and that's available on several of our web pages. So the mapping tools are important. I've referred to these mapping tools. We have a planner, which is an interactive tool available to anybody. You can go on, zoom into your area, and pull up any of the layers that pertain to the 12 species and the 2 different seasons, see what the predictions are. You can also see where other volunteers are doing work, which is really fun to see where others have reported in on their surveys. In addition, we have this Claim a Square tool, which is where volunteers indicate where they're going to be working, which squares they claim to do their surveys, and for which species and for which season. So that's a really important way to sort of communicate where the work is being done across all of the volunteer groups. And as well, if you are or thinking of becoming a local coordinator, we have an engagement toolkit. So we have some videos. We have our PowerPoint that has some of the content I've been talking about tonight. We have printable posters and flyers to hand out at meetings. We have a sample newsletter template that can be used if you have a club newsletter. We have a press release template. We have social media content. The webinars I've mentioned, we have a number of recorded webinars, both for coordinators and for participants. We even have a template for letters to local officials. So if you have a local official, whether it's a legislator or a township official who you think might be interested in learning about birds, or maybe even learning about climate impact to birds, there's a letter there that you can make use of. Feel free to invite them onto one of your Climate Watch surveys too. We find often legislators will have a good response to that. And we have a recruitment guide. Recruiting volunteers, if you have done other programs, other community science programs like the Christmas bird count or other bird monitoring programs, obviously there may be people on those programs who are interested in joining Climate Watch as well, Birding with a Purpose. We have one chapter in New York that recruited all of their volunteers using Facebook. There are evidently quite a number of birding Facebook groups out there, and so that's one strategy they've used. I gave a presentation to the Pennsylvania Master Naturalist program. It was a couple of years ago, but that was a group that was very interested in doing field work similar to Climate Watch. So if they're master naturalists in your area, they may be interested in joining the effort. Obviously, other local birding groups, garden clubs, and land trusts, we've heard from all of these kinds of groups that they're interested in Climate Watch. And here I have something listed on our North Carolina, Audubon, North Carolina website. They were already doing quite a bit of work around nuthatches. They had a nuthatch nest box program. And so as Climate Watch was developed, they were very excited to actually develop a monitoring program for the same nuthatches they were already working on. So if there's any of these species or species of interest for which you're already doing work, here's another opportunity for you. And one of the pieces of feedback we've received from our volunteers is what's listed here on the slide. We like the fact that we're contributing, even in a small way, to a scientific effort that will hopefully benefit the birds we love to watch. And we love to hear from the volunteers as well. So we have some online visualizations that you can take a look at. We're going to be updating this here in the next month or so. But the online visualization sort of summarizes what species, how many data points we have for each of the 12 species and where the work is going on, which volunteers, which states are being covered by Climate Watch work. So that's a really important part of understanding how important our volunteers are to the effort. So now I want to connect this to, okay, so I want to connect this back to the research. We've gone out and collected data, and we were trying to ground truth some of these predictions. And we're just now in the 6th year of this program, and we've already produced peer-reviewed literature on the data that volunteers have submitted, which is actually very exciting. It often takes years of data collection to formulate any sort of findings, but in 2020, our quantitative ecologist, Sarah Sanders, led a team in analyzing the Climate Watch data received earlier in the program. And this peer-reviewed literature was submitted to ecological applications. And so it's exciting that we had a quick turnaround, really within 4 years of collecting data. We had a quick turnaround to having some initial findings. And what's really interesting about this is Climate Watch volunteers essentially are starting to confirm the accuracy of some of our Climate Watch projections. And I want to read a little bit from the abstract. Pardon me for so going into this level of detail, but it underscores something really important about the involvement of volunteers. So climate change poses a threat to many bird species, and projections of future climate suitability provide insight into how these species may shift their distributions. Climate suitability is characterized using ecological niche models, which are the things that correlate the species occurrence, data with the these climate variables that are suitable for them. And so these ecological niche models rely on several assumptions that are rarely validated in situ and can be highly sensitive to modeling decisions. But using data from this Climate Watch program, which is a novel large-scale community science program, our team developed these occupancy models to validate near-term climate suitability projections. So we were able to estimate occupancy, colonization, and extinction dynamics across the species ranges. And more broadly, this research underscores the value of community scientist observations for ground truthing projections from statistical models. So it's not just it's not just that this was an effort to collect data, but it's actually giving us that feedback loop that we were looking for. We're learning almost in near real time what the birds are doing to respond to climate change. So here's some of the findings. Are occupancy. We asked the question, our species, these 12, we studied actually the first 7 species. This was before we added the full 12 set. So we studied the bluebirds and the nuthatches, our species occupying sites that are climate suitable in summer and winter. And we found that yes, they are occupying climate suitable areas, but the caveats come with probability of extinction. We asked the question, are species leaving sites that are worsening in climate suitability? So in winter, yes, 4 of the species gave us enough data that we can learn that they are moving, they are leaving sites that are worsening in climate suitability. And in winter, we might assume that that's because there's more of a limiting temperature factor around winter. But in summer, the brown-headed nuthatch is the only species for which we had enough data where we could say, yes, it's leaving areas that are worsening in climate suitability. And colonization. Are species moving into sites that are projected to be climate suitable? So this is the area where we're predicting species are starting to move to, that they haven't existed before. And we find a lot of yeses. Species are starting to move into areas where they previously did not exist. So that's a really interesting finding as well. Obviously, more data are needed. And I'm going to wrap up the conversation there, and we can share some links. And I hope people are still with me and that you have some questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kathy. It's really cool to see, after participating for a couple of years, seeing all the background work that you guys do. It's, I feel like a lot of times you guys do all this great stuff and we're participating, but there's so much more that we don't even understand. So that was a nice glimpse into all the great work that you guys do. I manage data here at the Pennypack Trust, and like you said, it takes years to give people what they want from that data. It's really cool to see how quickly you were able to turn that around. Before we get to the Q&A, I'd like to introduce Neelish. He runs the Climate Watch for the Wyncote Audubon Society. So while everyone's fresh after hearing it, we'd like to give him a chance to talk about how to get involved with Wyncote Audubon's Climate Watch. Is he here with us?
I am. Hi, Kevin. And really, honestly, it's an honor to be on the same podium as Kathy Dale, even if it's for a minute or two. Kathy's kind of a legend for those of us who are involved with Climate Watch. First, let me just reach out to those of you who are not in the Wyncote area. If you haven't started doing Climate Watch, and after this talk, you feel like you want to do it, certainly in Wyncote, we have enough experience that we're very happy to help you get started. And so feel free to reach out to Lee or me, and I'll put my email in here. We're very happy to tell you about our experiences and to try and, if anything, reduce sort of drop the barrier to entry. Because Wyncote, I think, is proud to say that they've been involved from the very beginning of the program. And so we've just been doing this for quite some time. The second point I'll make is, although Kathy's talk might be a bit daunting in terms of all of what you have to do to actually carry out the program, if you're in the Wyncote area, we've got a very established group that does it. And as she was describing these squares, we have assigned captains to the squares. They know the points. And so all you have to do, if you're new to Climate Watch and want to just join in and have some fun birding, is to join one of the blocks that are being surveyed. And the protocol will be handled by others who've been doing it for a while. So just to make it possible for you to see that this is a very easy thing to join. And my last point I'll make is, we have a very dedicated group of volunteers who do this work. This winter, we had the highest participation since at least I've been involved for the last 3 years. We have 22 volunteers who collected the winter data, and I expect that we will get that kind of participation for the summer. We can't wait for the summer month to come around, but we would love to have any of you who are interested in joining. So yeah, just send me an email and say, I'd like to just do one of these. And you can just do one, we'll let you know when it is, and just tag along. It's a great fun. It's a great way to learn, as Kathy was saying. You don't have to be a very experienced birder, and you will be with experienced birders, and it's a wonderful way to learn. And just, if you can't be patient, this is birding for ADD folks. You only have to watch and listen for 5 minutes before you move on to something else, right? So it's really, honestly, a great fun. So I'll stop here, and thank you, Kathy, for all the help you give us whenever I reach out to you and we're in trouble. so thanks.
No worries, thank you. I'll mention, sorry, I want to mention one of the strategies that I love about the how Wyncote approaches this too is, there are some people who don't have access to cars, or and some people who can't walk, the 3 miles it might take during a day to do some surveys. And so Wyncote has been really good at sort of pairing people up along those lines too. So one person can do the walking on the 2 points that require walking. The other person who can't walk as far can do the ones that you can do right at your car. So there are really creative ways to involve people to do half a square. Not everybody, you know, you don't have to do 12-point counts by yourself. You can split up the square. There's lots of ways to get to slice it.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. As they both have been saying, like I'm a younger birder and I'm new to birding. So 2017, it feels new still, but it's been a couple years. But it's one of my favorite days of the year because I get to go out with all of the people that got me into birding and who know much more than I do. I don't get to bird with Lee too often, but Climate Watch forces him to come out with me. So for anyone that's if you're a newer birder or experienced birder, this is a great program for you because you get to bird with people who have experience, or you get to teach the next generation. So that's another hidden benefit, I think, of this program. So with that, we have one question in the chat. It's actually a question I had as well. So since we count all the birds heard or seen during a point count, could we not indicate that we are covering multiple species by default? Yeah,
this is a there's a nuance to this. And so the protocol requires that that you select your surveys based on the best habitat for your target species. So it could be, so for example, my target species is eastern bluebird. And there are times when I do hear a white-breasted nuthatch while I'm on my eastern bluebird target surveys. But since I didn't select the habitat based on white-breasted nuthatch, it's not a target. Just because you see it, it isn't a target. The target is what defines the habitat. Having said that, though, this is where local coordinators are really important, and those of you who know a lot about bird habitat. There are a lot of caveats to that because in the Northeast, of course, you know, like I said, there are habitat for white-breasted nuthatch and eastern bluebird and goldfinch can really kind of merge, can overlap, right? So it's very possible that you could have 5 target species, you know, at once, but you need to make sure that you're picking the habitat for all 5. You know, all 5 habitats are similar enough, and this is where your local expertise is important. I don't know whether that muddied it or not, but
no, I think it clarifies it, Kathy, because some of our squares have habitat that will support both the white-breasted nuthatch and eastern bluebird, and Lee and I talk about whether or not we should include the eastern bluebird as our target, which we do in, I think, 2 of our squares. And we have other squares where we have the possibility of having joint habitat. It's just, I've always struggled with the fact that, you know, if we see an eastern bluebird, we're reporting it anyway. And so how does it, so that's very helpful. So we can go back and look at our points and say, are we really in the right points to have 12 full surveys for eastern bluebird as well when we're in that square, and maybe choose accordingly. So no, that's very helpful.
that sounds great.
That's funny you guys say that because I'm actually at my office here at the Pennypack Trust in Huntington Valley, and I'm right outside the bird blind, which is one of our spots. And that spot I have seen sitting right here in my office. I've seen a red-breasted nuthatch, a white-breasted nuthatch, and an eastern bluebird. So right here is a prime example of that exactly. So very interesting. We'll have to consider that in the future. Cool. Well, one more question here. If you do have any other questions, please toss those in the chat before we wrap up. And Kathy also put resources in the chat that she told you she would put there. So if you want to see those, go to the chat box and open those now before we close the program out. So next question here is from Judy. She says, I am really surprised that there is only one coordinator for Minnesota in Farmington, about an hour south of the Twin Cities. I live near Minneapolis, near a nature center. I would think that someone would have started this here.
Yeah, we would love to have more coordinators in Minnesota for sure. And you know, all I can say is it's an opt-in process. So we do reach out through our chapter network and promote the program, provide the materials. It's really an opt-in situation. So if you have access to that nature center or know any staff there or go there, if you even want to share with them this recording, I know this is being recorded, it'll be posted on WinCoat's website. You could, if you want to share with them the link to this recording and tell them about this program, that would be wonderful. It's really helpful to sort of spread the word.
Agreed. And Judy, coming from someone who works at a nature center type place, we're overwhelmed with all the different things that we can be a part of. So if you as a volunteer bring it up to them, you might want to help out as a volunteer and help them coordinate that. That might help get the ball rolling for them, and a key volunteer. It wouldn't be possible here at the Pennypack Trust without key volunteers. So be that voice and go talk to them. If you have any questions or need help with that, you can let us know. She said, I will most definitely consult with our nature center and my master naturalist group. Speaking of master naturalist, I'm also working to become a master naturalist. So it's a great project for master naturalists to be a part of because it gives you almost 10 hours of volunteer service at least. So another plug for master naturalists.
That's great.
I don't see any more questions here. Does anyone, now's your chance to speak up and ask a question live if you're not comfortable with chat. While you're working up the courage or thinking of your last questions, I'll do a plug for the next WinCoat Audubon Society's program. Our next live program or virtual program will be on April 22nd at 7:30 p.m. Similar to the way it is tonight, you'll hop on Zoom and you'll register for that on Eventbrite. It's not yet available, but keep checking our website. We will have Phil Whitmore, and he will be discussing the Understanding Backyard Habitat Recognition and Certification program. So he's gonna go through all the different programs that there are, list his top 10, and kind of go through the process of why they're important and how you can get a backyard habitat recognition for your own yard. So very exciting. We're happy to have Phil come in for us. Again, that's April 22nd, next month on a Friday night. Chat box here. I don't see anything come through. So if anyone tonight had questions, I think Kathy was happy to accept emails or other questions that way, as am I and Neelish and Lee. So plenty of resources tonight if you didn't get it enough. Thank you, Kathy. I know I'm ecstatic about this program and even more excited for the next count in May, I think it is. For us. So,
yeah, me too. I'm glad you guys are talking about this. Really appreciate the work that WinCoat's been doing on Climate Watch.
Well, thank you for organizing it.
Yep.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Neelish. And we'll see everybody on Earth Day, April 22nd for our next program.
Night.